The Elgin Police Department launched a brand new cold case unit to take a fresh look at Elgin's unsolved homicides and missing persons cases. As part of the initiative, they launched a podcast called Somebody Knows Something, and we've been airing those podcasts for you here on WRMN. Season 1 is called Where is Karen? Detectives Andrew and Matt from the Elgin Police Department are investigating the disappearance of 23-year-old Karen Sheepers, along with her car vanished without a trace after a night out with coworkers on April the 16th of 1983. With the help of the community, we hope to bring Karen home. Today we're going to feature episodes 6 and 7. Episode 6, Serial Killers on the Fox. The detectives review multiple serial killers who were active in the Elgin area in the early 1980s and travel to the Pontiac Correctional Facility to interview Brian Dugan, an Illinois serial killer serving a life sentence for 3 murders in the area, one of which has similarities to Karen's disappearance. So let's pick up episode number 6 right now for you. And while I get that all squared away, here we go. It is 10 past 9 on this Thursday morning, on this Wednesday morning, rather, here at WRMN AM 1410 and WRMN Radio on YouTube. And it's time now for Somebody Knows Something.
This podcast is based on information sourced primarily from police and media reports, but certain names and other identifying details may have been changed or altered for privacy and security reasons. While the events and cases discussed are based on real investigations, some aspects may be simplified for time and for narrative purposes. Voice actors have been used to read from statements or documents. All information presented is intended solely to inform and raise awareness. Hosts may discuss theories regarding the cases examined in this podcast, but such discussions are not intended to and should not be considered by the listener to be legal conclusions. All persons discussed are considered innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Listener discretion is advised.
This is Chief Anna Lally. Welcome to Somebody Knows Something, a podcast from the Elgin Police Department's Cold Case Unit. In this podcast, we will shed new light on cold cases in the city of Elgin by sharing untold details and by encouraging anyone with information to come forward. You will come along with real cold case detectives as they investigate active cold cases in real time and seek justice for the victims and closure for their families. We believe that the Elgin Police Department and our community can work together to bring closure to cold cases, because we know that, in these cases, somebody knows something.
Hello, and welcome to Somebody Knows Something, the Elgin Police Department Cold Case Podcast. My name is Detective Andrew Houghton.
And I'm Detective Matt Vartanian.
Last episode, we revealed information about a new lead regarding notes left in a car in the parking lot of PM Bentley's. And this week, we're moving on to theory number 3.
In this episode, we will make an assumption that Karen did leave in her vehicle alone and had planned to drive back to Elgin. And we will theorize that she potentially made contact with someone on her drive back to Elgin.
You know, Matt, we've taken a few drives up to the location where PM Bentley's was, and both to Karen's apartment and Terry's old house. The drive to Karen's from the bar is about 10 minutes, and the drive to Terry's just a few minutes longer than that. I know we're certainly going to talk a lot more about Karen's apartment and about Terry's house in later episodes, but it's important to remind our listeners that all 3 locations, the bar, Karen's apartment, and Terry's house, are located on the east side of the Fox River.
Yeah. We will take our listeners along with us to recreate the 2 routes that we believe would have been most likely the travel routes for Karen in a future episode. But for now, we are focusing simply on the idea that Karen crossed paths with another person on her drive back to Elgin.
I will say briefly that we have considered the fact that Karen could have potentially gone somewhere else other than Terry's house and her house when she left. So in case anyone out there is thinking about that option, we have thought about that.
Yep.
The problem is that Karen didn't have another boyfriend. She didn't have family that was close by. She had no reason that we can find that would make her drive off to some way that was away from Elgin.
Right. We do know that one of Karen's best friends, Shirley, lived near the bar, and she was devastated when Karen went missing. She said that Karen never came over after the bar that night, and we have no reason to believe that Karen was there at any point. Shirley lived in the Meadowdale apartments within a few blocks of PM Bentley's.
Yeah, so even if she drove by there, she's still staying on the east side of the river. We also thought about the option that Karen could have gone to some after bar in the area. So we interviewed a bunch of people from the area, including Frank, the owner of PM Bentley's, and other people, about different places that people would go when the 2 a.m. bars would close. I think it's important to note that Karen's friends, her family, her coworkers all describe her as not really the type that would go out by herself to some other bar like that late. And there's no cell phone, so we can't show that she got a call from somebody saying, hey, come over to so-and-so's place. That's where we're all at. There was a bar over by Floyd's. There was a bar called Penny Road Pub. Some of those spots may have been open past 2 a.m., but it would be hard for Karen to know that people were there because no one could call her to say, hey, come to this other bar. She would have had to go there with someone she met or have frequented those other places on a regular basis, which we don't have any evidence to support that.
That's right. Well, the main topic that we want to talk about in this episode is that there were active serial killers during the early 1980s. In this episode, we will talk about 3 of those serial killers or serial killer groups. The first serial killer we want to discuss came to our attention when North Aurora solved the case in 2024. Since then, a number of people have contacted us and speculated that the offender in that case could be involved in Karen's disappearance.
Okay, like you said, so October 2024 is a couple months back. The North Aurora Police Department revealed they had solved the 1979 murder of a 19-year-old girl named Kathy Holly. On March 29th, 1979, Kathy left her home in North Aurora and planned to walk to the Northgate Shopping Center to meet her sister, but she never made it there.
And then almost a month later, on April 24th of 1979, a young boy who was fishing in the Fox River just south of the I-88 bridge in North Aurora discovered her body. Police believe that she was abducted from the parking lot of her apartment complex prior to leaving for the shopping center. You know, certainly an abduction in a parking lot could be similar to Karen's case here, right?
Yeah, and she was going to a shopping center. PM Bentley's was in a shopping center. There's some similarities there.
Yeah. So the North Aurora police were able to use genealogical DNA, something that we may use in one of our cases in the future, to identify a suspect in Kathy's murder. His name is Bruce Lindahl.
Just for some background on Lindahl, in 2020, he was linked by DNA to the 1976 rape and murder of a 16-year-old girl named Pamela Maurer. She had been strangled and sexually assaulted. He was also a suspect in the 1980 rape and murder of a 25-year-old woman named Deborah Colliander. She disappeared from Aurora as well. Like Kathy, Deborah was abducted from a parking lot, and she was later buried in a field and found in rural Kendall County in 1982.
Yeah. Lindahl remains a suspect in the 1979 disappearance of another girl, too, 16-year-old Deborah McCall. She vanished after leaving Downers Grove North High School on November 5th of 1979, and she has still never been found. You know, I know one thing we're trying to do with this podcast is generate community interest in cases like Deborah McCall's as well. Any information we can get and any attention that we can create to any of these unsolved cases, whether they're Elgin cases or not, is something we both think is really important.
Absolutely. If we can generate interest or tips on any of these cases, we definitely want to do that.
While Lindahl was linked to multiple abductions and murders, often involving women he abducted in parking lots, he was killed on April 4th of 1981. Almost exactly 2 years before Karen went missing. Lindahl had met an 18-year-old man named Charles Huber in Naperville that day and went with him to a female's apartment. Lindahl then attacked Huber, likely in an attempt to abduct the female, and Huber had fought back, causing Lindahl to inadvertently stab himself in the femoral artery. Both Huber, who likely saved his friend's life, and Lindahl died from their injuries. So, Andrew, we can be 100% that we can exclude Lindahl as a suspect in our case with Karen.
Yeah, that's right. Again, I have to say we appreciate tips people are giving us and posts on social media. We are looking at those and trying to follow up on them. Even a tip like this, which doesn't lead to a suspect, helps us narrow down people in the case, right? And it helps encourage other people to still give us details and give us information and let us work out those finer details.
Yeah. Another tip that came back to police in 1983 involved a serial killer group known as the Ripper Crew. These guys were arrested for multiple murders in the early 1980s all over the Chicagoland area. In fact, this group was listed in the original file as a potential lead from tipsters back in 1983.
That's right. And these guys actually might have a link to one of our other cold cases from 1979. In reviewing that case and speaking with the family, some believe that someone in this group could have possibly been involved with Renee Tovar's case. On November 24th of 1979, 24-year-old Renee Tovar was brutally murdered in the 100 block of South Liberty Street in her apartment. Renee was beaten and stabbed and mutilated, and there have been media reports and information, including a true crime book, which suggested that the Ripper Crew, or at least some members, could have been involved for that case. That case is still an active cold case on our docket, so we encourage people to check out Renee's case on our site and provide us any information they might have about her case. Okay, so this Ripper Crew consisted of 4 men. Andrew Kokorelius, his brother Thomas, a guy named Robin Geicht, and an accomplice, Edward Spreitzer. Police estimated that these 4 men were responsible for brutalizing up to 20 different women in the early 1980s. And reports documented that in some of the cases, they cut off the victims' breasts after killing them, used them in satanic rituals in Geicht's attic, and reportedly maybe even ate parts of their victims.
Most of the women were abducted off the streets in Chicago and the western suburbs between roughly 1981 and 1982, right?
Yep.
So the members were convicted for various offenses, and Andrew was actually executed in 1999. He was the last inmate to be executed in the state of Illinois. Both Robin and Edward remain incarcerated to this day, and Thomas was actually released in May of 2024 and is currently living in central Illinois.
So I'm looking at some of the tips and documents from the original case file, Matt, and they talk about these guys as a suspect back then in 83. They were also suspects in the disappearance of Carol Pappas in Wheaton, Illinois in 1982. She was the wife of Cubs pitcher Milt Pappas. Local area people will recognize that name. Milt Pappas spent 17 years in the major leagues with 4 different teams, including 4 seasons with the Cubs. He was a 3-time All-Star, and on September 2nd, 1972, he pitched a no-hitter against the San Diego Padres at Wrigley Field. This no-hitter was the last no-hitter thrown by a Cubs pitcher in Wrigley Field up until even this day. Needless to say, when his wife disappeared in 1982, it was a really big deal up here in the Chicago area.
Yeah.
And Carol, people thought that maybe this Ripper Crew was involved with her and killed her. It turned out that in 1987, her car was just found in a body of water close to the Pappas' home. She had crashed, and they pulled it out, and there she was. That's a theory that kind of is consistent with Karen, and one of the things we're going to look at with her later in the season.
Yeah, I know we will be talking about that option soon on a future episode. So in 1983, the police ran down leads on the Ripper Crew pretty quickly. Records show that all 4 of these guys were arrested in late 1982, just a few months prior to Karen's disappearance, so we can also rule them out as being involved in Karen's case.
Matt, I will say that one thing that was really shocking as we went down the rabbit hole on this theory was just the sheer number of different serial killers in the Fox Valley area in the 1970s and 80s. I mean, you go back to guys like John Wayne Gacy, which is like 30 or 40 minutes away from here. You jump into the 80s, and a bunch of these guys in the Chicagoland area are out here. It's really crazy when you start to look at the area and realize how many missing persons there still are that are cold cases, how many murders that are still cold cases, and how many are potentially involving these different serial killers.
Yeah. There's one more person who tipsters both in the past and since we've reopened this case have brought to our attention as being possibly involved in Karen's disappearance. That person's name is Brian Dugan. Dugan is still alive and was out of custody in the Fox Valley area in April of 1983. In fact, he had committed a murder just 2 months before Karen had disappeared. At that time, Dugan was living in the Aurora area, and he's definitely someone we need to talk about as a viable lead in this case.
For sure. Brian Dugan's story is an awful one. He really had that quintessential serial killer background. People that follow true crime podcasts and TV shows have probably heard of something called the McDonald Triad. It's a theory that was first suggested by a forensic psychiatrist named J.M. McDonald in 1963 in an article called The Threat to Kill. It's kind of fallen out of favor in recent years, but we wanted to mention it here because it is a popular theory in TV and movies, things like that, and some forensic psychiatrists still view it as a potentially useful tool. While it's not 100% predictive of future behavior, it might be somewhat predictive of future behavior. The theory basically says there are 3 different factors in childhood that can be predictive of violent tendencies, especially serial violent tendencies in adults. Those 3 factors are chronic bedwetting, fire setting, and animal cruelty. As I said, the theory has become more controversial over the years, but it basically says that if a child exhibits at least 2 of those different factors, there's a higher probability that that child could become an adult who exhibits predatory behavior. Matt, Brian Dugan had all 3 of those.
Yes. According to media reports, Brian was a chronic bedwetter from a young age. He was born in New Hampshire in 1956 and reportedly attempted to burn down the family's garage when he was only 8. Then he hit the trifecta when he was 13 and doused a family cat with gasoline and lit it on fire. Media reports had documented that Dugan was also a suspect in sexual offenses in his youth, including the attempted sexual assault of one of his siblings. Dugan's first confirmed case in Illinois that we could find was a case in 1974 in Lisle. He attempted to abduct a 10-year-old girl at the Lisle train station, but she had screamed and run away. Dugan was arrested, but the charges had later been dropped.
Yeah, he had a number of different cases in Illinois, and those cases included 3 confirmed abductions where he raped and murdered a victim. Matt, I kind of want to work backwards here and walk through those cases just to get an idea of his cases.
Sounds good.
So, Dugan was ultimately arrested and convicted of abducting a 7-year-old girl named Melissa Ackerman in Somonauk, Illinois on June 2nd of 1985. Somonauk is about an hour from Elgin. It's a small, very rural town. And on that day, Dugan drove up to 2 girls, age 7 and age 8, in his blue AMC Gremlin as they rode their bicycles on a rural roadway. He abducted Melissa's 8-year-old friend and threw her into his car and then chased after Melissa, who fled. Melissa's friend was able to escape from Dugan's car, even though he had disabled the rear locks. She was able to scramble over the seat and get out of the car as he came back carrying Melissa screaming. The friend fled and hid from Dugan, but Melissa wasn't as lucky. Her body was found several weeks later in a creek about 15 miles from the site where she was abducted.
So Dugan had later admitted to abducting, raping, and strangling Melissa before dumping her body in that creek, and he was later convicted for that case. And that was when his confessions and later DNA had come into play.
That's right. So after his arrest in 85, DNA and some statements linked Dugan back to not 1, but 2 other murders. He was linked to the 1983 abduction, rape, and murder of a 10-year-old girl named Janine Nicarico from her Naperville home, and a 1984 abduction, rape, and murder of a 27-year-old woman named Donna Schnorr near Batavia. All the sites of his abductions were in the Fox Valley area, and as we said before, he was living in Aurora and was around this area at the time Karen went missing.
Yeah, and we know that Dugan was incarcerated from 1979 to 1982, but he was paroled in July of 1982 and committed his first confirmed murder, the murder of 10-year-old Janine, on February 25th of 1983, just 2 months before Karen had went missing. Janine had stayed home from school with the flu, and her mother worked, just down the street. She had come and checked on Janine throughout the day, even having lunch with her. And then that afternoon, Dugan knocked on the door and discovered that Janine was inside alone. When she refused to answer the door, he kicked it in, chased her up into her bedroom, and that is where he tied her up. He then kidnapped her and then drove her to a nearby park. After he raped her, Dugan had Janine walk down a gravel path barefoot. He crept up behind her and used a tire iron to bash her skull in and dumped her body nearby. She was found roughly about 2 days later by some local hikers.
There are lots of articles and information about Dugan, and each of his cases were huge in the area at the time. We could literally spend hours just talking about one of these cases, but really it's his second murder that interests us the most in relation to Karen.
Yeah, that's right. We know that Dugan targeted young children in 2 of his cases. Janine was 10 and Melissa was 7, but it was the abduction of Donna Schnorr on July 15th of 1984, which led citizens to submit tips regarding Dugan in this case, and which we found to be relevant to this investigation.
Yeah, so Janine was abducted from her own home, and Melissa was abducted on a roadway. But Donna was different in a couple ways. For starters, Donna was in her late 20s, and she bears a striking resemblance to Karen.
Yeah, that's right. Donna was a nurse who Dugan saw stopped at a red light in Aurora as she was driving home alone at roughly about 3 a.m. on July 15th of 1984. He followed her onto Randall Road near Mooseheart and then sideswiped her car and ran her off the road, right?
Yeah, it sounds a little familiar to Karen's situation, right? Assuming Karen left PM Bentley's and drove back to Elgin, she'd have been driving alone in the early morning hours. She's in her 20s. Plus, Donna's case was a little over a year after Karen's disappearance. So we know he's active in February of 83, he's still active in 84, and he's out. He's not in prison.
Right.
So is it possible that Dugan did something similar to Karen?
Yeah, maybe.
So basically, after Dugan ran Donna off the road, he blocked her car in with his and exited his vehicle. She reportedly rolled down her window and said something like, "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" And he approached her and punched her in the face, abducted her, tied her up, and forced her in his car. He left her car parked on the shoulder of the roadway and drove a short distance to a nearby rock quarry where he raped her before drowning her in the quarry and dumping her body in the water. He later abandoned his car somewhere else to conceal the fact that there was potentially paint transfer between the two cars, and because as he was leaving, several men driving into the quarry to fish saw him driving out. Those same men found Donna's body just a couple hours later and called the police.
So Dugan's MO is not identical to Karen's case, but Karen was a young female in her 20s, potentially driving home alone that night, similar to Donna's situation.
Yeah.
You know, the thing is, Andrew, Dugan did abduct, rape, and dump his victims in close proximity to where he had originally taken them. And all three of his confirmed victims were, located fairly quickly after the crime had occurred. He also concealed two of the three in bodies of water.
Yeah, but there are numerous bodies of water along the routes Karen would have taken, including a large quarry. It is possible that he could have been close enough to simply conceal maybe both her body and the vehicle, and that she just hasn't been found, right?
Yeah. I mean, it is possible. He had dumped Janine just off of a path, but it seemed like he progressed and learned something. After Janine's murder, Dugan dumped Donna and Melissa in water to try to conceal their bodies and likely to wash away any trace evidence. He even covered Melissa with large rocks, so he was sort of honing his craft a little bit here.
Yeah, and in Donna's case, he got rid of his own car. So it's at least plausible to theorize he could have potentially gotten rid of or concealed Karen's car if he's getting rid of his own car. We just don't know. We have to at least consider that, though, right?
Yeah, that's true. I think we also should mention that Dugan was a suspect in numerous other cases as well, some of which were uncharged in 1985, that give or provide some other background on how he operated, which might be relevant to Karen's case. So for an example, in May of that year, he reportedly followed a woman who was driving alone all the way to her house and approached her pretending to be a concerned citizen. Dugan had told her that her taillight was out, and then he entered the woman's car armed with a knife and abducted and raped her, but he later released her.
Yeah, so again, something like this could have happened with Karen. Maybe Dugan follows her back to Elgin, parks on the street, and approaches her in a similar manner. He could certainly force her to drive him somewhere else like that and then conceal her in the car, but then he'd have to get back and get to his car.
Yeah, the fact that he would not only run women off the roadway, but also follow them to their home could fit for Karen's case here. And Andrew, obviously we now have this situation with Susanna and someone following her home from PM Bentley's to think about. That could be similar to Brian Dugan's MO as well.
Yeah.
Dugan had also abducted a 19-year-old woman who escaped from him and successfully abducted and raped a 16-year-old in the days after that. Oddly enough, he didn't kill either of these women. He even told one of them his actual first name, Brian.
I think one thing we took away from going through all these cases with Brian Dugan is that if Karen did cross paths with Dugan, there's a number of things that he could have done other than just running her off the road like he did with Donna. He also didn't seem like he really pre-planned very much. It seems like he was kind of just out and about, and if he saw an opportunity, he acted almost immediately. He kidnaps a girl in broad daylight with Janine.
Yeah.
Donna's driving along, and he runs her off the roadway and abducts her and then takes her to a place where people are frequently fishing, and they actually see him leaving. You know, even with Melissa, the abduction site where he took her was close to a tractor dealership, and her friend that ran away was able to hide near that dealership. So there'd be people around. I mean, he's not really careful in what he's doing.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think he definitely took some steps. He disabled the locks, in the car, for example, when he abducted Melissa. And it seems like he had equipment with him, such as a knife and rope or duct tape, something to bind somebody. But it didn't seem like he had a pre-planned site to take his victims or to dump the bodies.
Yeah, and in some cases, he told the victim his actual name, and then he just lets them go. He lets them live. In other instances, he killed the victim pretty shortly after the abduction and rape. In one article we found, Dugan claimed to have let some of the women go because he claimed he was sure he wouldn't be caught in those cases, and that the cases where he killed people were ones where he was afraid he'd be caught. That just never really tracked for me as I read it.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about him abducting adults and teens, some of who saw his car, who he told his name, who saw his face, and he lets those people go. And then 2 of the 3 people he kills are little kids. They may not have recognized him as well. They may not have remembered his car as well. It just didn't make sense to me that he would do that. I mean, I think that his credibility is just kind of shot. It seems more likely to me that he would kill people that he thought he could get away with killing, not that he was afraid that he'd get caught, so he would kill these kids.
Yeah, his actions just don't scream that he was, very meticulous in his planning or had things, really well thought out in advance. And he was very, very brutal with his victims. While we don't know if Dugan was involved in Karen's case, certainly there are similarities. Karen, like Donna, was a younger white female who was potentially driving home alone in the early morning hours, and she was driving in the Elgin area, which is close in proximity to his other cases.
Yeah, and Dugan had other cases where he followed women home and approached them there. Again, that's something that could be similar to Karen's case. In fact, some of Karen's family and friends actually reached out to us and asked if we were considering Brian Dugan as a suspect. So we certainly want to talk about him as a possibility in this case. Dugan was sentenced to the death penalty for Janine's case. But in 2003, he, along with 166 other death row inmates here in Illinois, had their sentences commuted to life in prison by then Governor George Ryan. It was the largest blanket commutation for the death penalty in American history. And Dugan's still alive. He's currently incarcerated in protective custody at the Pontiac Correctional Facility.
Well, like we've said before, we decided at the start of this investigation that no tip or theory should be off the table for this case. So even though we can't specifically link Dugan to this case, and there are some differences between his cases and Karen's disappearance, there is enough there that we wanted to talk to Brian. So we went to Pontiac to do just that.
All right, so we're here in Pontiac at the Pontiac Correctional Facility. Looks like there's about 600 inmates here. Building's been here since 1871, so it's an old facility. They have a max security prison here and a medium. Brian's he's in protective custody, right, Matt?
Yeah, protective custody.
So
yeah, very much like the feel that you would kind of expect of like a state prison, right? A lot of kind of spread out buildings, a big yard in the middle. The buildings look very kind of old and just kind of dated. I mean, obviously there's some snow on the ground from last night, so kind of adds the effect to it a little bit.
yeah, big concrete buildings, like probably built in the 30s and 40s and stuff, some old administrative buildings, but we're going to head in and see what Brian has to say and see if he wants to talk to us.
Okay, so after arranging an interview and going through security, we waited for Dugan on the third floor interview room?
Floor.
Yeah, of their internal affairs unit at the jail. It's a long concrete building built in the 1930s. It looks, almost like something out of World War II or an old prison movie.
Yeah.
A guard escorted Dugan into the building. He was dressed in a blue uniform and was handcuffed to a chain around his waist. Dugan is 68 years old, and he certainly looks it. He has gray hair and uses a walker to help him get around. After he came into the room, we asked that the cuffs be removed, and Dugan took off his coat, rubbed his wrists, and sat on a small bench in front of us in a room where there was a bank of windows that overlooked the snow-covered court that was below.
Dugan didn't have anything new to tell us, but I should add that in other media reports, he's always maintained that he does not have any outstanding cases anywhere else in Illinois, which would include Elgin and Carpentersville.
At this point, we don't have any physical evidence that would link Brian Dugan to Karen's case, but we also don't have a Karen's car or her body. As we've mentioned in past episodes, we will be looking at various bodies of water in the area that would possibly be along Karen's, routes of travel as we just try to investigate this case further. So maybe that will provide some new information that could link Brian Dugan or somebody else in this case. For now, he is still a bit of a question mark in this case, but he is someone to keep in mind for our case and for other area cold cases with similar MOs here in Illinois between 1974 and 1985.
In our next episode, we are changing up the order of our theories. Originally, we planned to move on to theory number 4, that Karen made it home. But as with all police investigations, things can change. Our months-long preparation to bring new technology and launch a massive search for Karen in area bodies of water is now becoming a reality in the next few weeks. So, we're moving up our original theory number 6, that Karen crashed her car into a body of water on her drive back to Elgin. Next episode, we will take our listeners along as we identify the routes Karen could have taken, travel those routes, and prepare to literally dive deeper into Karen's case here on Somebody Knows Something.
If you or anyone you know has information about this case or any other cold case in Elgin, please contact the Elgin Police Department cold case email at coldcasetips@elginil.gov or the cold case tip line at 847-289-COLD. You can also review cold case information on the Elgin Police Department's Transparency Hub by going to elginil.gov and navigating to the Elgin Police Department's Transparency Hub, where every cold case homicide and missing persons case is listed with photographs and information about each case.
Well, there you have episode number 6, 945 here at WRMN AM 1410 and WRMN Radio on YouTube. And we are joined now by the detectives from the Elgin Police Department that you heard from so much in episode 6 and have been hearing from during Somebody Knows Something. Where is Karen Sheepers? Talk a little bit about episode 6 and then get us ready for episode 7. Which we will play in just a little bit. We have Andrew Houghton and Matt Vartanian here with us once again this week. Welcome back to the show, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Good morning.
Yeah, so episode 6, where we just heard, I guess you guys felt like because of the fact that there were some known serial killers in the area, in and around the area, in and around the time when Karen Sheepers came up missing on April the 16th of 1983, that in covering all the different theories, whether there was any credence to it or not, you had to look into the serial killers and see if there was any connection or not, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
We'd had people contact us too. We'd had tips of people asking us about Bruce Lindahl. The original case file talked about the Ripper crew. And then we had people, including people in the friends and family group, asking us about Brian Dugan. So they were all people that we felt like we needed to at least take a look at.
Bruce Lindahl was quickly eliminated because he died in 1981.
Yep.
Yes.
And Karen didn't come up missing until 1983. What was, I didn't hear too much about the Ripper crew. What was their deal?
Yeah, so they were pretty active around the Chicagoland area. It was 4 of them, and they would kidnap, abduct, rape, and murder young women, and then they would actually mutilate their bodies and, from what we kind of gathered, do some pretty gruesome things. Some possible satanic rituals were involved with, pieces of the body and things like that of the victims that they had. Just some pretty grotesque stuff.
Yeah, and they were in the western suburbs area and Chicago. So they were someone they were listed in the original case file as potentially being a lead, but they were all arrested in December of 1982. So we just wanted to kind of backtrack and at least talk about them.
Yeah.
And the fact that some people had told us in the past that they were potentially suspects or possibly somehow related to another cold case that we had in 1979.
So all of the Ripper crew were behind bars when Karen Sheepers would have come up missing on April the 16th of 1983. So then that leaves us to Brian Dugan. Were those 3, Lindahl and the Ripper crew and Dugan, the only 3 known in that area at that time? Or
It's known to us, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, you have Thomas Erlacher, who we're going to talk about in a future episode, who lived in Karen's apartment just before her, and he was the prime suspect in a 1976 rape, murder, abduction of a missing girl who was never found. She was 14 out of Mount Prospect. So we're going to talk about him, but that's his only known case, so he doesn't really fit that criteria of being a serial killer, per se.
Yeah.
But he's certainly someone we're also going to talk about. There were a lot of just active sex assault cases and things like that in that time frame too. But these were kind of the three main groups of people that we were able to identify from, 1980 to 1983 kind of time range.
Yeah.
So that leaves us with Brian Dugan in episode 6, and he seemed to be very much a person that made a little more sense than the first two that we've just talked about. Dugan was active at that time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, he was.
Yeah. And so you went to Pontiac, Illinois to try to track, and you tracked him down.
Yes.
Brian Dugan. But it was something that you felt like you might get some information at that time when you talked to him, but he wasn't really, he wasn't offering much, right?
Yeah, I didn't want to speak with us. Didn't really have anything to add, so it was a pretty quick trip, But it's still something that we had to do just to make sure. You never know who wants to talk these days, even somebody that's convicted, of multiple murders.
Right.
That's something we had to do.
And he said that of what he had been convicted for and what he's doing life in prison for, that was it.
Yeah, in the past, his prior statements have basically been, these are my 3 cases I was convicted on. I don't have anything else out there. Now, he could be lying. He could be telling the truth. We don't know that. But that's why we wanted to at least try to go talk to him. And I think we kind of say in the episode, if we were to find a vehicle or find other physical evidence, then we would have a little bit more to go on. But at this point, because he had some similarities in his abduction and murder of Donna Schnorr, it was something that we at least wanted to consider as a possibility.
Yeah, with running a car off the road and then, abducting a woman out of a vehicle and then raping and murdering her, that's one possibility that we had looked at with Karen's case because we don't know what happened to her and could something have happened on her ride home? Did somebody come across her and do something similar to that? I mean, it's a stretch, but we have to, as we've said on this podcast before, we have to look at all possibilities of what could have happened.
The fact that he followed people home too and would approach them there, that could fit something like Susanna's case with these letters. It could fit because she was followed home. It could fit Karen's case. So there were enough similarities there that we thought we need to at least take a look at that.
Yeah.
Well, and you also would think that sometimes if someone's spending life in jail and they have nothing to lose anyway, any more to lose, that they might cough up some more information about something else they did.
Yeah, you just never know. You never know what someone's willing or wanting to talk about on any given day when you walk in and are face to face with them.
Yeah.
I mean, he's never getting out of prison. He was sentenced to be executed and was commuted. So he will never get out of prison. So you sometimes hope that maybe talking to somebody like that, he doesn't really have anything to lose or gain by talking to us because he's never getting out.
Was he from around here, from around this area?
He was living down in Addison at the time, I believe.
Yeah.
It was where his family was, but he had some ties to Aurora, the western suburbs around this area, possibly up in McHenry as well, McHenry County, some ties potentially. So he was out and about this area. I mean, his one case was Somonauk. His other case was basically like Batavia, Geneva area. Yeah. His other case was Naperville. So, this whole kind of area on the western suburbs.
So you, because he wouldn't say anything more, or maybe he was telling the truth, either way, he still can't 100% be eliminated as a suspect, right? Or
no, we can't fully eliminate him.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, obviously we can't include him either, but we're just kind of taking every lead we have and taking a look at them.
Yeah, we would need something concrete to tie him to the case, and we don't have that. It's, as we have said before, we truly don't know what happened to her, and we don't have a crime scene. We don't have her physical body. We don't have the vehicle. So those would be important things that could possibly reveal somebody that would be involved if that is the case.
It's Somebody Knows Something. We're taking you through episode 6, which we just played here on WRMN this morning with the detectives, Andrew Houghton and Matt Vartanian. And we're getting ready for episode 7 here in just a short time. I guess we can transition into that a little bit because there's a lot to episode 7.
Yeah.
There's a lot to episode 7. She, and it's going to be about the bodies of water that she possibly most logically would have been found in had she left the bar, PM Bentley's, and decided to drive home that night, right?
Yeah, so as we've discussed before, if this case happened nowadays, we would have technology on our side to at least give us some idea of a direction, whether it's through something with the vehicle, cell phone records, something else that could tie us, surveillance video. So in episode 7, we are looking at the 2 most likely paths of travel, assuming that she was driving home from the bar. So we look at a path of travel from PM Bentley's back to her house. So there's 2 of them that, we think would be the most probable that she could have taken.
Yeah, and our initial structure was going to be traveling to her house and her childhood home and also her apartment, which we've done. But episode, 8, I guess?
Yes.
We had planned on episode 8 and 9 being her house and her childhood home and interviewing people there, which we've done a lot of that investigation already. But the technology for these dives kind of came up. We've been planning it for the last 4 months or so. And so we wanted to kind of take people along as we did it in real time. With police investigations, sometimes you plan on doing one thing and something else comes up, and that's kind of what happened here. So we're pivoting and going to our theory number 6 and moving that up for the next, episode or 2 episodes.
If you just think of it logically, it makes sense, because some of these theories, which all have to be considered, seem more far-fetched. One that seems more reasonable would be her going into the Fox River or going into a body of water on the way home that night, based on several things that you talk about in episode 7. The fact that the water's high.
Yep.
We had some flooding, or at least the river stages were higher than they had been in a long time.
Yep.
And the fact that her car's missing.
Yes.
So she left the bar. It's the logical route home. It does take her near some bodies of water. It seems to be very, very much worth pursuing, maybe faster than some of the other things, right?
Yes.
Yeah, as soon as we had the option to do that search, we wanted to do it, obviously. So like we said, we're trying to take people kind of in real time as we do that. So once that became available, we booked our time slot to do that, and we're going to do that.
Right. So the routes are along Route 25, coming in from Carpentersville into Elgin and staying on 25 all the way until you get to this neighborhood just north of downtown here.
Yep.
Then another route would be turning off at 25 onto 72, right, and going up to where Duncan takes.
Yeah, into the downtown area right there, and then heading south to get to Duncan Avenue. There's several bodies of water, to include the Fox River. That one I think is really intriguing to us because there's so many possibilities. There's some private bodies of water, one specifically on the Max McGraw property, that's very close to the roadway. You take all of that, you take the fact that it's very dark. We drove that recently, and it is, even now in 2025, it's still a very dark path. And, with the technology in vehicles nowadays with, newer headlights and everything like that, it's still very dark to drive it. So I can only imagine how dark it was back in 1983.
Yeah, and the Duncan Avenue route, from what we've gathered talking to people that grew up in Dundee and Elgin and Carpentersville, was a type of route that people would kind of routinely take. They would cut up that way to get to the Spring Hill Mall at the time. They would cut up that way to get to East Dundee, downtown East Dundee, things like that. So
we never really have established how much or whether or not for sure Karen was drinking that night, right? We haven't talked much about that. Nobody's been able to say she was heavily under the influence or anything.
Yeah, and the general consensus that we got from her close family and friends and even some coworkers is that she wasn't a big drinker. She liked to have a good time, but she was the kind of the life of the party girl, if you will, where, we know that there was a phone call that she had with her fiance that night, and she kind of brushed it off and, just said, I'm not going to let this bother me. I'm going to have a good time. I want to focus on the Hulu contest, which we've talked about. But yeah, there's nothing to answer your question. There's nothing that says that.
No one describes her as like falling down drunk or anything like that.
Right.
But, we kind of have to at least consider the fact that even if you have a couple drinks, maybe you're tired. She's staying up maybe later than she normally would.
At the bar for 7 hours.
Yes. That could impact, her reaction time and things like that. Maybe she just had a couple of drinks, but she's also used to going to bed at 11 o'clock, and now it's 1 a.m. And so she's had a long day. She's tired. It's the end of the week. She's maybe had a couple of drinks. Maybe she hasn't eaten a lot.
Yeah.
And all those factors impact her reaction time to something like a deer running out on the roadway or water on the roadway or whatever. We think that's at least a plausible scenario.
Yeah.
Well, we'll find out all about what we've just talked about in episode number 7. We only have about 40 seconds here till we catch our break here, but there will be a deep dive in the next couple of weeks, right?
Yes.
Yep. Within the next 2 weeks, we should have our searches kind of underway and going. So we're hoping to take people in episode 8 and give you guys some details of how that process is going or how it has gone.
Yeah. We'll see if that maybe solves the disappearance case really quickly or not. So stay tuned. Coming up in a few minutes, we'll play episode 7 for you. And I guess you guys, next time around, we'll recap what we did today and what we found out since today, right?
Yep. Yeah, that's correct.
Thanks a lot for being here.
Yep, thank you for having us.
It's Andrew Houghton and Matt Vartanian, Elgin Police Department Cold Case Unit. And more of Somebody Knows Something is on the way. Next, stay tuned. Now, but they're about to take you through episode number 7. They move up their original theory number 6, that Karen and her car are submerged in a body of water as new tips come in and new technology becomes available. We're going to play this all the way through. I think it's going to be about 35 to 38 minutes in length. And then what I'll do is come back briefly, take a quick break. Matt will take over for the last few minutes of the hour, and then he'll be in full force with his Out to Lunch show next hour. He has a couple of guests coming in from the city of Aurora. So that's all on the way during Out to Lunch today, which starts right now with Somebody Knows Something, episode number 7, Where is Karen Sheepers? 10:10 on WRMN. Good morning.
Primarily from police and media reports, but certain names and other identifying details may have been changed or altered for privacy and security reasons. While the events and cases discussed are based on real investigations, some aspects may be simplified for time and for narrative purposes. Voice actors have been used to read from statements or documents. All information presented is intended solely to inform and raise awareness. Hosts may discuss theories regarding the cases examined in this podcast, but such discussions are not intended to and should not be considered by the listener to be legal conclusions. All persons discussed are considered innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Listener discretion is advised.
This is Chief Anna Lally. Welcome to Somebody Knows Something, a podcast from the Elgin Police Department's Cold Case Unit. In this podcast, we will shed new light on cold cases in the city of Elgin by sharing untold details and by encouraging anyone with information to come forward. You will come along with real cold case detectives as they investigate active cold cases in real time and seek justice for the victims and closure for their families. We believe that the Elgin Police Department and our community can work together to bring closure to cold cases, because we know that, in these cases, somebody knows something.
Welcome to Somebody Knows Something, the Elgin Police Department Cold Case Podcast. I'm Detective Andrew Houghton.
And I'm Detective Matt Vartanian. This season, we have been investigating the case of Karen Sheepers, a pretty 23-year-old woman who disappeared on April 16th of 1983, along with her canary yellow 1980 Toyota Celica with red accent stripes. In our last episode, we considered the possibility that Karen left PM Bentley's and attempted to drive back to Elgin. We theorized that she could have come across someone on her drive, and we talked about some of the active serial killers that were here in the area in the 1980s. For episode 7, we had originally planned to take you to Karen's apartment from 1983 and her childhood home. But as with any police investigation, things changed.
Our original theory number 4 was that Karen made it home. So we planned to visit her apartment, her childhood home, and meet with some of the people associated with those locations over episode 7 and episode 8 of this podcast. But as luck would have it, our months-long plan to use new technology in our search for Karen sped up. So we're shifting gears and we're prepping to take a really big step in this case that has been months in the making.
As we mentioned in our first episode, our final theory, which is theory number 6, was that Karen crashed her car into a body of water. We've also mentioned that we have been planning to bring in updated sonar technology and even divers to search for Karen and her car. Preparation for a search like this is intense and time-consuming. Plus, we also wanted to be sure that we were prepared and had the right conditions that were safe for this search. As it turns out, we are ready to dive in the coming weeks.
That's right. So instead of heading to Karen's apartment or her childhood home, we're pivoting and we're taking you along with us as we prepare to search and literally dive deep into theory number 6, bodies of water.
For this episode, similar to theory number 3, we will assume that Karen left the bar in her car and attempted to drive back to Elgin. But for this theory, we will retrace the likely routes that Karen would have taken to identify the areas we want to use this new technology for. Could Karen and her car still be submerged in a body of water waiting to be found? Well, we'll plan to find out.
Maybe it'd be helpful to first explain to our listeners why we want to do this search and kind of how we went about the preparation for this project, Matt.
Yeah, I agree. So there was an article from 1999 in the Kane County Chronicle that we came across during our research, which stated that police searched several salvage yards by helicopter for Karen's car and dragged the river and even a quarry in a 50-mile radius, but the car was never found. The problem is there's no record to confirm any searches were even done beyond the aerial searches, and we both believe that it is highly unlikely that this statement is accurate. Even if it is, the newest technology from what we've gathered is light years ahead of what police would have used even 5 years ago, right, Andrew?
Yep.
So bringing in a search company with the most up-to-date technology is something that we felt was absolutely necessary in this investigation.
The problem we found is we can't cross-reference our efforts with what was done 20, 30, or 40 years ago when it comes to searching physical bodies of water. We did reach out, like Matt said, to various people in law enforcement who worked this case in the 80s, retired law enforcement people like that. They remember the aerial searches, but there's nothing about any extensive dives or sonar or anything like that. There was one quarry that was reportedly searched in a different area south of Elgin in the early 2000s, but that didn't turn up anything related to this case. And as far as we can tell, there were no extensive dives or other technology used on Karen's possible routes of travel.
Yeah, because we don't have records to cross-reference, we decided that the best course of action was to map the routes and just assume that nothing had been searched, basically starting from scratch, right?
Yep.
This way, we can document each body of water that we search and mark it so that we have a full record of everything that we have done on this case.
Matt, I think we should start by talking a little bit about Karen's actual car.
Yeah, I agree. As we've stated before, Karen's car was a canary yellow 1980 Toyota Celica with red accent stripes, and it had an Illinois license plate of XP8919. We did some research on Karen's car, and it is pretty small. It's a two-door vehicle and is about 4 foot 3 inches tall, 5 feet 4 inches wide, and just under 14 feet long. It also weighs approximately 2,400 pounds, give or take. To give people a comparison, one of the most popular cars in America in 2025 is the Toyota Camry, and that car is almost 4 inches taller, 8 inches wider, and 2 feet longer than Karen's vehicle. Andrew, we should just add that people have asked about Karen's car and the possibility that it was junked or sold or whatever else possibly could have happened, right? We want to confirm for the first time publicly that we actually have the original title for that car.
That's right. For someone to at least legally junk it or sell it or retitle it, they would have needed that hard copy original title. But it was recovered from Karen's belongings. So we can say that, at least from a legal standpoint, it was never legally junked or sold or retitled. People like Terry had access to her apartment, so if he or someone else wanted to take it, they could have, but they didn't. Karen had just paid off the car, I believe in March of that year.
Yeah.
And she had just had it with all the rest of her belongings. So luckily, we do have that original title.
Right. So if Karen drove her Toyota Celica from PM Bentley's back towards Elgin, or at least that's what we're assuming for this particular theory that we're looking at, we decided that there was a few variables that we needed to account for as we looked at this theory. The first thing that we wanted to look at was the actual road conditions and the water conditions that weekend. We spent hours going through microfilm of old newspapers for the time period and through digital, different records as well. We came across some pretty compelling information from local newspapers for roughly the time frame of April 14th through April 16th, right?
We did, yes. In several newspapers from the week leading up to Karen's disappearance, we learned that the Fox River was heavily flooded. In fact, on April 14th, just a day before Karen went to PM Bentley's, the Fox River was at one of the highest recorded flood levels ever. Matt, I grew up in a central Illinois town. on a river. My dad and brother both work on the Illinois River. I spent summers working there too. I've seen a lot of flooding, and if the river is high, even bodies of water not attached to the river can be affected by that.
Yeah.
There's different water tables and things like that. So if the Fox River was above flood stage, then it's likely that other bodies of water like local ponds, lakes, quarries, things like that would have been at a high level too, more than likely. The water could have even been high enough that one of her routes had water on the roadway, or that water was closer to the roadway than it normally would be under the normal conditions. It might not be a coincidence that Karen and her car both disappeared the same week that water levels were at a historically high level in the same area where she was driving.
Yeah, Andrew, talking about water levels too, it's not inconceivable that there was water that was high enough to conceal a smaller car like Karen's, especially if it had flipped, or crashed, for example. Cars from the 1980s were heavy. They were basically all metal, not all different types of plastics and other materials like cars are made of today. A car, especially a heavy older car like that, would sink pretty quickly, we would think. Typically, the engine would pull the car down nose first because it is the heaviest part of the car. And it's possible that Karen could have been knocked unconscious in a crash and trapped inside, especially if the car rolled or flipped before it went into the water.
Yeah. And while research shows that the 1980 Toyota would have had shoulder strap seatbelts, was she wearing her seatbelt? Maybe she wasn't. And even if she was, we know Toyota didn't start using airbags until 1989. So there's no airbag in Karen's car. Could she have crashed and been incapacitated? We certainly have to consider that possibility.
Yeah, Andrew, that's a great point. And while we don't know Karen's level of intoxication, she was at the bar for something right around 7 hours or more. Is that right?
Yeah.
And the owner had told us that they didn't have a kitchen. So people are just there drinking and dancing and maybe, munching on pretzels, popcorn, nuts, or, some other little bar food like that, right? That's a long time that she was drinking throughout that time frame. While her coworkers didn't describe her as falling down drunk, even if she had left a little buzzed, her reaction time to something like water on the roadway or maybe even a deer running out in front of her or some other obstruction, could have definitely been delayed. And that could have made it even more plausible that a crash was more likely.
The next thing we wanted to look at was the weather on the actual date that Karen went missing. So April 15th and April 16th were really cold days. The Daily Courier even called it, quote, unseasonably cold, end quote. We searched places like the National Center for Environmental Information and local newspapers, and while we did not find any specific precipitation in the early morning hours of April 16th, it was below freezing by 1 a.m., and there were gusts of wind reported too, somewhere between 6 and 12 miles an hour. Even a small amount of wind could theoretically blow water or debris onto the roadway under those frigid conditions, maybe cause water to blow on the roadway and freeze, so we feel like that could be important.
Yeah, and another thing we looked at was the different phases of the moon, which sounds kind of weird when you say it out loud, but we wanted to see how dark it would have been that night. There was a new moon phase on Tuesday, April 12th, meaning that there was no moon in the sky that night. Friday into Saturday, so April 15th into April 16th, there was what was called a waxing crescent moon. Depending on what resource you look at, approximately 10% of the moon was illuminated around 1 a.m. on April 16th. So it would have been a nearly moonless night.
So it would have been pretty dark, especially if there was, cloud cover in the sky.
Yeah, pretty dark. Even on a cloudless night, there would have been a lot less light pollution from the suburban area back in 1983 versus today. Elgin is almost 116,000 people now. Back in 1980, it was about half that, or maybe just around 60,000 from what we can gather. Mm-hmm. And Carpentersville was closer to about 20,000, not nearly the 40,000 people that it has today. In fact, the whole area where Karen would have been driving was a lot more rural looking with fields and trees, cornfields, I guess would be another way to put it. Many of the places where there are actual businesses or residences today.
Well, Matt, I think we can safely say it was dark, it was cold, it was windy, it was potentially slick. And that's all overnight on April 16th of 83, when Karen potentially leaves the bar. We also know the Fox River and other bodies of water in the area were at historically high levels. So all those factors could be really significant. This theory seems like a very plausible one, so we're going to take a really detailed look into it.
Okay, now that we have an understanding of the weather and lighting and potential road conditions, we want to identify and recreate the likely routes that Karen would have taken if she did leave the bar to go back to the Elgin area. Most of the main roads from 1983 are still in existence, but we know that streetlights, trees, fences, buildings, water levels, and even entire bodies of water would have been very different 40 plus years ago.
Yeah, that's right. And for us to look at the state of roadways and streetlights and other topography and make it like an apples to apples comparison, that would be really foolish. The routes now are not identical to how they were then. So we decided we need to take on the task of figuring out how to look at maps and roads from 40 years ago. Plus, we also wanted to see what bodies of water actually existed in 1983, because some of those bodies of water don't exist now. There's different retention ponds and things like that that didn't exist in 83, so obviously we don't want to waste our time looking at a body of water that wasn't even there when Karen disappeared.
Yeah, I would agree. And this is where a retired detective from Mount Prospect, retired detective Mike Nelson, really helped us out. Mike worked on the Barbara Gluckert case back in the mid-2000s. Barbara was a 14-year-old girl who disappeared in 1976, and she might have some links to Karen's case that we are going to talk about in another episode. Anyway, we met with Mike to kind of look over any potential leaks between Karen's case, and her disappearance and Barbara's case, and Mike told us about a company called Sidwell Corporation, which is located just down the road in St. Charles. They have aerial photographs that cover this area. So, with his suggestion, we contacted them to see if they could be of any help.
Yeah, I have to say, Sidwell Corporation was amazing. I want to personally thank Russell from Sidwell Corporation for diligently searching through all the maps they had from basically 1980 to 1983 and helping us get our hands on the detailed copies of photographs from the area around PM Bentley's in Carpentersville and Elgin for that time period. He was also able to get us those copies in just a couple days. The company and Russell specifically have been really instrumental in helping us prepare for this upcoming search, and we wouldn't have even known about them if it hadn't been for Mike. So we want to make sure we thank him too.
Yeah. And after looking at all the photographs and doing some additional research, we settled on two main routes that make logistical sense here. Let's get into those routes.
Okay, so if you look at a map and like the aerial photos of the area, Carpentersville is basically just north of Elgin, with East Dundee kind of sandwiched in between. Roughly speaking, Interstate 90 runs from Chicago in the east of Elgin all the way west to Rockford, and it passes through the northern portion of Elgin, crossing over the Fox River between Illinois Route 25 on the east side of the river and Illinois Route 31 on the west. The Fox River kind of meanders through Carpentersville and then goes south through East Dundee and then into Elgin as it continues south through the Fox Valley area. Our listeners will remember that PM Bentley's is in Carpentersville, just about 5 miles north of Karen's house in Elgin. Terry's house is just a few minutes further south in Elgin from Karen's place. What's really important is that all three locations are on the east side of the Fox River.
Yeah, that's correct. They are all on the east side, so it doesn't make a lot of sense for Karen to cross the river at any point on her ride home. But she certainly could have driven along it, and there are a number of bodies of water in that area. So we wanted to take a look at the most plausible routes to identify the areas that we wanted to search for Karen.
All right, Matt, I think it's time for us to go for a drive.
Sounds good.
All right, so we are at PM Bentley's. It is about 1 o'clock, just a little before 1 a.m. And we're up here. We picked the day 2 days after the new moon, so it's the same moon phase as Karen's day. She would have been missing. We're sitting here. It's pulling out of the lot now, but we were right where about Karen's car would have been parked, third row or so, right, Matt?
Yep.
Obviously dark. Street lights are going to be better now than they were then, but we're going to go Route A here, and Route A is going to be southbound on Route 25 from PM Bentley's, and so that's where we're heading now.
Yeah, so as we travel, and, Andrew, there's one body of water up here that kind of has always stuck out to us. So as you just go past 72, continuing to go south on 25, you're going to come across Santa's Village. And, we've always looked at, there's a little body of water on the right-hand side right after the intersection. Now there's a Dunkin' Donuts, Baskin Robbins. So right behind that, and on a lower elevation than what is the roadway now, there's a body of water there. It looks to be a little pond. So we've always thought as a theory, if something had happened, if she's in a body of water somewhere with her car, that could be a potential spot, right?
Yeah, for sure. It looks like back in the day there was maybe a little gravel turnabout or something, or maybe a little building, but it was definitely here, and it would have been just to the southwest of the intersection of Higgins, which is 72 and 25.
Yeah, and the other thing that, we've noticed too while we're driving this is, there are street lights that are here nowadays, but there's not a ton. It's not like you're driving on I-90 and there's a street light every, certain amount of feet or whatever. So we wonder how dark it was. We've heard from Frank, and some others that this was a 4-lane road back in the day. So, we would assume that's still what it is. But, we're going right by the pond right now, and it certainly looks.
It's right there. It's probably 20 feet from the roadway.
Yeah, it's pretty close. Yeah, so as we continue on Route A here, we pass a bunch of used car dealerships that are here now.
This was all cornfields.
Yeah, back in the day, it was not that way. And as we continue to go down here, we pass by the Max McGraw wildlife property that runs along almost all of the west side of 25 and then a little bit of the east side up as you get closer to I-90. There's several bodies of water, obviously, on the Duncan side that we are interested in, but there's a few here that we'd like to talk about too, right?
Yeah, that's going to be Route B is our Duncan route. This Route A, there's a little pond here on our right-hand side on the east side of the roadway that looks like just a little spillway kind of pond. It doesn't look like it's very deep. We may take a look at it with the dive team in the future here. And then on the...
that one would be on the west side.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, on the west side here. On the east side of the roadway is a pretty large lake, but it's pretty far back, Matt. I mean, it's a couple hundred feet back from the roadway through a lot of tree cover.
If you go with the theory that she's driving southbound, and if this was a 4-lane road, she would have to cross both lanes of southbound traffic, the northbound lanes, and then go through possibly a fence or, some trees and other, foliage or anything else, and then go down into the body of water.
Yeah, there it is there.
It seems kind of unlikely. Not to say that it couldn't happen.
This little pond is just south of the entry to Max McGraw, but it's pretty small. I mean, like I said, we'll take a look at it on the west side of the roadway here, but that's pretty much it. I mean, we're almost to I-90 now, and there's really nothing else between here and Karen's house. We would just take 25 south, continuing to a bunch of different roads that would cut over to Lovell, but 25 hits Slade and Lincoln and a couple other streets that you could take and just cut right over to Karen's house. Was it about 5 miles?
Yeah,
Matt?
Just under 5 miles, I believe.
So just around 5 miles south, and then it's about a half a mile west of here to get to Karen's house. So we're turning on Lovell here now. Karen's house is just a couple blocks down from where we're at now. I can see it up on the left. It's the south side of the roadway. It's a blue house in the 300 block. It's about a 10-minute drive total drive time. Nothing crazy. Pretty basic roadway. Fairly well lit. Concrete roadway. Major thoroughfare. So that's pretty much Route A in a nutshell. And we're going to have to head back up to do our Route B drive, which I think is the more interesting and, more complicated route for us to talk about.
Okay, so after we checked out Route A, we wanted to do the same with the second route, which we identified as Route B. So under the same conditions, we drove back up to PM Bentley's and left a second time, taking Route B. Okay, so we are back up at the bar where we're at PM Bentley's. So after we checked out Route A, which was Route 25 in Elgin, we wanted to do the same thing with Route number 2, the second route, that we had identified, which we will call Route B. So under the same conditions, we drove back, and obviously we are just leaving PM Bentley's now, and then we're going to travel along the second route, which is Route B, just to kind of get a feel for what might have happened on Route B.
Yeah, so again, we're going to turn south on 25. We kind of have two options. We can take 68 over and hit back down to 72, or we can take 72 over. But you're basically going to take 25 and then make your way back west. We're taking 72, so we're going to go by that Santa's Village pond again that we saw on Route A. And then we can take Higgins here, basically right into downtown East Dundee.
Yeah.
And as you get close to East Dundee, downtown area, you can make your way down to a street called Elgin Avenue. You just kind of cut through to the south, and that turns into Duncan Avenue, which basically runs right along the Fox River, right?
Yeah.
From downtown East Dundee all the way down to just north of Karen's house. It dumps you out in her neighborhood.
Yeah.
The first thing that sticks out here is this is a 2-lane road. There's very little street lights. It's very, very dark. I mean, even compared to Route A, with just, it was dark on certain points. This is very, very dark. There's certain points where the river, which would be on our west side, our right side as we're going south into Elgin, comes up pretty close, right, Andrew, to the road?
Yeah, we found 2 different spots as you're traveling southbound. One closer to East Dundee. That's just under 100 feet right now under these conditions from the roadway to the riverbank. And we know the river's lower now than it was then with the dams coming down.
Yeah.
And we know the river was high
Yes.
when Karen went missing.
Yep. Yeah, we continue to go southbound on Route B here, and there are, once you get away from, the populated area, there's nothing. There's no streetlights.
It's very dark.
There's really only a couple guardrails. The thing to mention, too, is, with cars nowadays, obviously the technology is a lot better than the cars in the 1980s. The lights are brighter, and even with the lights that we have now, it's still very, very dark, even with the brights on. Very, very heavily wooded on both sides.
Yeah, and with this phase of the moon, it's dark. There's almost no moon in the sky. It's a little cloud covered right now. We don't know what we would have seen then. Probably some cloud cover. It was windy and cold, her day that she went missing. But it's really dark back in here taking Duncan.
Yeah. And as we are continuing to go southbound on Route B, we want to mention that coming up on our left-hand side, there is a pretty significant body of water that we'd like to talk about, right, Andrew?
Yeah, so Max McGraw Wildlife Fund owns a bunch of property here, and they basically own from here all the way over to Route A, all the way over to Route 25. And there is a pond that runs, we can pull up to it now.
Yeah.
It's less than 30 feet, 40 feet from the roadway to the edge of the water, and this pond runs a full quarter mile along the roadway. You can see, there's a couple spots here where it's just fence, and that's it. And we talked to somebody that said there wasn't a fence here, right, Matt?
Yeah, that's correct.
We know back in early 80s, multiple people we've talked to have said this would be a normal route that people would take to kind of cut through and get up to Dundee.
Right.
That it was kind of a known route for people in the neighborhood where Karen lived. So it's entirely possible that she could take this route. And I can see the water from, the driver's seat here, just on the other side of this little fence. There's almost no brush even between here and the water.
Yeah, and as you continue to go south on Duncan Avenue, the river comes close to the roadway again, up on the right-hand side, on the west side here.
Yeah, I think this is the second site that we looked at that's right around 90 to 100 feet from the roadway to the river, just north of I-90.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of coverage here. Like, there's some small brush and stuff like that, but it's not that far from the river. I think it's entirely possible that, given how high the water was, that there could have been water close to the roadway. Maybe there's even water on the roadway, Matt. We don't know.
Yeah. But what do we know about the depth of the river?
So we reached out to a bunch of people through DNR and different sources, and finally settled with some people with the city of Elgin, actually, because the dams are coming down. They're doing different studies on the depths of the river. So we've had people contact us and have said, well, there's just no way. The river's just too shallow for that, right?
Right.
But I know he told us that that's just not the case. I'm going to turn in here on Trout Park Boulevard. There's like a little boat ramp and stuff here, but see if you can.
Yeah, so from what we've gathered after speaking with people from the city, so from the city of Elgin, the Kimball Street Dam to about Lincoln Avenue is roughly 7 feet to 8 feet in depth. Around that point at Lincoln Avenue, it drops to 4 to 5 feet. Then it opens back up to 6 to 8 feet up to the water treatment plant. The bend around the river, which is right at like the water treatment plant, is the deepest part, which would be between the Carpentersville Bridge and the Elgin Dam. Karen could have gone into the river, right around I-90, when it was at the highest point, it had ever been. So it's not unreasonable to think, that if the car did go in there, it could have been in there pretty good, and nobody could see it.
Yeah, the river kind of runs from where we're at right now, just north of I-90, where we can see the river. It's about a quarter mile from here to that bend. So the river runs south from here where we're at, and it cuts a little bit to the west and bends and then comes back south again.
Right.
That bend, they're telling us, is like upwards of around 8 feet, maybe more than 8 feet. So, if she makes it into the channel, they said it's a pretty fast-moving river, like deceivingly fast-moving river.
Could have been pushed.
Yeah,
pushed
especially
downstream.
especially at flood stage. If she makes it into the channel or makes it in the river, like, it could pull her out a little ways, and she could be within spitting distance where we're sitting, basically.
Yes.
And under 4, 5, 6 feet of water. We talked earlier in this episode about the specs of her car. If her car is only about 4 feet tall, if it lands either upside down or on its wheels at 8 feet of water, we don't know the bottom of the river, what sediment looks like, stuff like that. If it sinks a foot, it could be under 6 feet of water, 5 feet of water, just depending on where it's at. So,
yeah, people think, we've gotten some comments from people that you would be able to see a bright yellow, a canary yellow car in the river. And I don't know about you. I mean, I've swam in the Fox River before, and it's very, very hard, because of all the sediments. It just, the water seems to be dirty. It's not necessarily that's the case, but it's hard to be able to visually see that. So I think it's very possible that if really a car of any color goes in the river, it's going to be hard to see it, unless you really know where to look.
Yeah, we don't know how it landed. I mean, if we're theorizing the car's in the river, it could land on its side, it could land on its top. If it landed on its top, you basically have a gray bottom.
Yep.
A
metal colored, right?
And if it goes through debris, like you could have debris attached to the bottom of the car as it goes into the water. I mean, you could have sticks and grass and all this different stuff attached to the car as it goes in the water too. Like, it's entirely possible. I think it's at least a plausible option that it could be in the river or in one of these bodies of water as we go south.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so we feel pretty good about our two routes, Route A and Route B. There is another option that we're kind of calling Route C, which is sandwiched in between Route A and Route B, and it runs through the Max McGraw Wildlife Fund property. It was there in '83, and it was an open roadway called Sunset Park Drive. It's now a private roadway owned by Max McGraw, so she theoretically could have taken Route A south and turned through the Max McGraw property to get over to Duncan. It's a pretty winding road, but we did want to add it to our search parameters, so we're calling that Route C. It certainly is a possibility, but we don't think it's that likely just because it is really windy. It would have been a mix of asphalt, possibly asphalt and gravel back then. And there are some bodies of water kind of close to it, but not close enough that we feel like it's really, really viable. We just want to mention that it's something that we want to talk about too.
Yeah.
We heard from a lot of people that people would take that as a cut through to get up to Carpersville, things like that. And so we drove it with some people from Max McGraw this week. There's really not a lot of bodies of water that are close to it that would make sense. And it would have been a pretty windy, out of the way kind of road for Karen to take. But we did want to mention it because some bodies of water on that property are things we may need to expand into our search.
Yeah, it seems like you wouldn't have gone fast enough to possibly go off the road because of how windy it was.
Yeah, and there was really no water that was deep enough close to the road where you would be able to conceal a car.
Yeah.
So essentially we have Route A on 25, Route B on Duncan, and kind of this Route C that's sandwiched in between. But we feel like Route B is probably our biggest water search area.
Right.
And Route A is also going to be on our radar. For the last portion of this episode, we want to discuss a few tips that have come in regarding cars that people thought could have been Karen's Toyota. And we have 3 different tips that we want to talk about.
That's right. The first tip came in last summer, shortly before we publicized the existence of this cold case unit and this podcast. It really goes to show that even without any media about this case, we were still getting tips periodically from people in the community who were interested in Karen's case. The tips are called both the Kane County Forest Preserve Police and the Elgin Police Department to report that she had found remnants of a vehicle that were visible on Google Earth. The vehicle was south of Lake Marion Road, near a marshy area off the roadway and some pretty heavy brush. We both went up there and trudged out into the forest to find the vehicle, and the Forest Preserve Police also searched the area. We found 2 different vehicles, but neither of them were Karen's. But this just goes to show that the community is still invested in this case, and we do truly appreciate the tip and others that have come in. We are hoping that your tips will help break this case open and finally bring Karen home.
Another report came in more recently about a yellow car in the Fox River. A number of the dams on the river have been or are currently being removed. That includes a dam in Carpentersville that was removed back in the fall of 2024. As these various dams have been dismantled, the water levels have really fluctuated quite a bit in some of those areas, and there's been some reports on social media that a yellow car was seen on video as crews were removing that dam in Carpentersville. We reached out to the Kane County Forest Preserve Police Department, and we can debunk this rumor. There were some time-lapse videos of crews removing the dam, and they were using a lot of yellow construction equipment, so maybe that's where this information originated from, but we can confirm that no vehicle was found.
We did, however, get a third tip. There has been a lot of social media buzz about a two-door car on the east side of the Fox River north of the old Carpentersville Dam. The car is an older model two-door vehicle, and Karen's vehicle is also a two-door vehicle. While the vehicle is north of the routes that we identified for Karen, we decided that it was worth taking a trip up there to the area and wanted to actually see the vehicle firsthand. Our producer, Ben, came along for the ride.
I don't get paid enough.
So we're out here on the east bank of the Fox River in Carpentersville. We had received some information yesterday from the Kane County Forest Preserve Police about a vehicle that was sighted by a Facebook group called Friends of the Fox River. So they alerted us that they had located the car here. So we're out here looking at the vehicle. You know, what's interesting, Andrew, is this is a two-door vehicle just like what Karen drove, but from what we can gather, it looks to be different.
Yeah, the front window's got like a vent, like one of those vent windows. And then, I mean, it's probably similar size, maybe a little bit longer, but the back window's not the same either. I can't tell the make or model. It's too rusted.
Yeah.
It looks like it was a lighter color maybe, but I don't see. I'm trying not to fall in the river here.
Yeah, you good?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Across from this island. Hell, the water levels really dropped since they killed that dam. Yeah, you can see almost like the water line around here. It's probably like 5 feet at least. While it will take us a few more months to 100% identify the car from the river, we're pretty confident it's not Karen's car. Just based on the frame, the size, the windows, it does not look like a Toyota Celica. But Karen could still be waiting to be found somewhere in the depths of the Fox River, or in a nearby pond or lake. We're hoping a more thorough search with this new technology in the coming weeks will lead us to a new vehicle, Karen's missing Toyota Celica, and maybe even lead us to her.
Next episode on Somebody Knows Something. We will be out again in the field, this time searching for Karen and her car, and we will take listeners along with us as we are searching multiple bodies of water, including the Fox River and other areas, for Karen and her car. We will be using boats, sonar, drones, and even divers. After almost 42 years, will we finally find Karen's final resting place using this new technology? Could this search be the last chapter in the decades-long search for Karen Sheepers? Find out next time here on Somebody Knows Something.
If you or anyone you know has information about this case or any other cold case in Elgin, please contact the Elgin Police Department cold case email at coldcasetips@elginil.gov or the cold case tip line at 847-289-COLD. You can also review cold case information on the Elgin Police Department's Transparency Hub by going to elginil.gov and navigating to the Elgin Police Department's Transparency Hub, where every cold case homicide and missing persons case is listed with photographs and information about each case.